elderly man lived in a tree for 40 years, but what's inside surprised everyone. Walter Thompson adjusted his time-worn brown hat and smiled at the visitors, who stopped curiously before the wooden door he himself had installed in the trunk of the centuries-old tree. The 75-year-old retired carpenter always greeted people kindly, but few imagined what truly existed behind that weary smile and eyes that carried decades of loneliness. 40 years earlier, Walter had discovered something that would change his life forever. His wife Evelyn was secretly planning to commit him to a psychiatric clinic, convinced he was developing dementia because she constantly caught him talking to himself while working in the woodshop. In reality, he merely had the habit of verbalizing his thoughts while measuring and cutting wood, a characteristic he'd developed over decades of working alone. The discovery happened by chance when Walter returned home early from work and overheard Evelyn on the phone with a doctor, discussing the details of the commitment. She described non-existent symptoms and brazenly lied about behaviors he had never displayed. The shock was devastating. The woman with whom he had shared his life for 25 years was willing to destroy his freedom based on a lie. That same night, Walter took only the essentials and disappeared. He knew the region well, having spent his childhood exploring the woods surrounding the town of Mendocino in the heart of Appalachia. It was then that he found the giant tree with the hollow interior, a natural refuge that would become his home for the next 40 years. The first months were terrible. Walter cried every night, missing his daughter Jennifer and the life he had built. But gradually, his carpentry skills transformed the empty space into a functional dwelling. He built shelves, a small bed, a table, and even an ingenious rainwater collection system. The entire town believed Walter had simply left, never to return. Evelyn spread word that he had had a breakdown and run away, reinforcing her version of the facts. Jennifer, then 22, was torn between sadness over her father's departure and relief at not having to deal with a possible progressive mental illness. But Walter never truly left his family. Through an elderly neighbor named Dorothy, whom he regularly met at the town market, he discreetly followed every important event. Dorothy was the only person who knew where he was and, moved by his story, agreed to be his bridge to the outside world. For years, Walter received news about Jennifer's growth, her marriage, the birth of his grandchildren. With each piece of information, he carved small wooden toys and wrote letters he never sent, carefully storing everything organized inside the tree. Life in the woods wasn't easy. Walter developed arthritis in his hands, but created homemade remedies with local herbs that eased the pain. He planted a hidden vegetable garden and sold handmade furniture in the neighboring town, always using another name. The money was little but enough for his basic needs, and for some surprises he sent anonymously to his family. Dorothy never revealed that it was Walter who paid for the college education of her granddaughter Amanda, Jennifer's daughter. Through her, he followed every achievement of the young woman, from her first words to her graduation in education. Inside the tree, entire albums documented the life of the family he observed from afar with binoculars during public events. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Walter's routine was meticulous. He woke with the sun, tended the garden, worked with wood, and at day's end wrote in journals that accumulated year after year. Each entry recorded not only his feelings, but details about what he observed of the family through Dorothy, or moments glimpsed from afar. Evelyn remarried 5 years after Walter's disappearance, this time to a city merchant named Robert. Jennifer had mixed feelings about her stepfather, but ultimately accepted the situation. What she didn't know was that Evelyn had also lied about the circumstances of her father's disappearance. Gradually, Evelyn altered the narrative. She claimed Walter had drinking problems, was aggressive, and had abandoned the family due to irresponsibility. Jennifer, young and impressionable, ended up internalizing these distorted versions of events. Over time, anger replaced longing. Walter learned of the lies through Dorothy, who overheard conversations in the neighborhood. The pain of knowing his daughter had been turned against him was almost unbearable. Many nights he considered revealing himself, but always reached the same conclusion. Evelyn might indeed try to have him committed, and now she had the power to convince Jennifer he was dangerous. The years passed slowly. Walter aged inside the tree, his hair turned completely white, but his mind remained sharp. He developed an exercise system to keep his body active and continued reading, always asking Dorothy to bring books from the public library. Jennifer became a teacher and had 2 children, Amanda and Michael. Walter followed his grandchildren's growth through photographs Dorothy discreetly obtained. For each birthday, he carved a miniature gift and stored it in a special section of the tree, hoping for some uncertain future day when he might deliver them. Dorothy grew old alongside Walter. At 80, she struggled to walk to the forest, but never stopped visiting him. She was his only real human company, and the two developed a deep friendship based on confidences and mutual solidarity. It was Dorothy who brought the news Walter most feared. Evelyn was spreading word that he had been seen in the area, hinting he might be dangerous. The strategy was clear. She wanted to ensure that if he ever appeared, no one would believe his version of events. The situation grew complicated when Michael, Walter's grandson, began asking questions about his missing grandfather. The boy was curious and intelligent, and the conflicting stories about Walter made no sense to him. Jennifer felt uncomfortable with the questions, but couldn't provide consistent answers. Dorothy reported to Walter that Michael had asked directly why his grandfather never sent letters or called, since other classmates had contact with distant grandparents. The child sensed something was wrong with the family's official story. Walter then made a risky decision. Through Dorothy, he began sending small anonymous gifts to Michael, always on special occasions. They were unique wooden toys, carved with the perfection only an experienced craftsman could achieve. Michael became intrigued by the mysterious presents. He showed them to Jennifer, who grew disturbed but couldn't explain their origin. The quality of the wood and care in execution made clear they weren't an amateur's work. Tension at home increased when Michael noticed similarities between the toys and an old photo of his grandfather in his workshop. Jennifer had kept only one photograph of Walter, hidden at the back of a drawer, but Michael discovered it during play. Evelyn realized her great-grandson's curiosity could be problematic. She intensified negative comments about Walter, trying to convince Jennifer that any attempt at contact would be dangerous. But Michael, now a teenager, was determined to uncover the truth about his missing grandfather. Dorothy watched the situation with growing concern. She knew Walter suffered knowing the family had been turned against him, but she also saw an opportunity in Michael's curiosity. The boy represented a new generation, less influenced by Evelyn's lies. During a difficult conversation, Dorothy suggested to Walter that perhaps it was time for him to take initiative himself. 40 years of self-imposed isolation had been a huge sacrifice, but maybe it was no longer necessary. Evelyn was aging, her influence waning, and a new generation of the family was growing up. Walter resisted at first, the fear of rejection, of misunderstanding, of accusations of abandonment, all weighed heavily on his shoulders. But the idea was planted in his mind, growing quietly like the plants he patiently cultivated in his secret garden. The situation changed dramatically when Amanda, now an adult with a degree in education, decided to hike in the woods near town. She was going through a tough time, questioning life choices, and sought some alone time to think. Amanda walked for hours, purposely losing herself in familiar childhood paths. That's when she heard the sound of someone working with wood. Curious, she followed the noise until she found a clearing where she saw a scene that left her frozen. An elderly man with white hair, wearing a brown hat and green jacket, was working intently in front of a giant tree that had a door installed in its trunk. The man hadn't noticed her presence yet. Amanda watched, fascinated by his precise movements as he carved a piece of wood, the concentration on his weathered face, the evident skill in every gesture. There was something familiar about the scene, like a distant memory trying to surface. That's when she saw the pocket watch hanging from a chain, glinting in the sunlight filtering through the leaves. It was identical to the one her mother had described as belonging to her missing grandfather. Amanda's heart raced as the pieces began falling into place in her mind. Walter finally realized he was being watched. When his eyes met Amanda's, time seemed to stand still. He immediately recognized the familiar features, the curious expression she'd inherited from her mother. It was his granddaughter, the girl he'd watched grow up through photographs and Dorothy's reports. "Are you my grandfather?" Amanda asked with a trembling voice, barely able to believe what she was seeing. Walter dropped the tool he was holding. 40 years of isolation, of contained longing, of silent love, all culminated in that unexpected moment. He tried to speak, but could only nod, his eyes filling with tears. Amanda approached slowly, still processing the discovery. The man before her didn't match any of the descriptions she'd heard her whole life. He didn't seem crazy, aggressive, or irresponsible. He just seemed lonely and tired. "Everyone thinks you're dead," she said, her voice still unsteady. "Mom said you abandoned us when I was a baby." Walter closed his eyes for a moment, gathering courage for the words he'd carried for decades. "I never abandoned you." His voice came out hoarse with emotion. "I hid to protect you from a lie your grandmother made up about me." "What lie?" Walter gestured toward the tree door. "Do you want to know the truth? Everything's documented in there. 40 years of our history that you never knew." Amanda hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. Walter opened the handcrafted wooden door and revealed the tree's interior. What she saw left her speechless. The space was completely furnished with finely crafted wooden pieces. Shelves lined the curved walls, filled with albums organized by years. A small table occupied the center, surrounded by chairs proportionate to the space. Every corner had been cleverly utilized, creating a cozy and functional environment. But what impressed Amanda the most were the photo albums. Walter had managed, through Dorothy and discreet observations, to document practically the entire family's life. There were photos of her as a baby, of Michael, of Jennifer at different stages of life, of graduations, birthdays, important events. "How did you get all this?" she asked, flipping through an album dedicated specifically to her. "Dorothy, our neighbor, helped me all these years, and I never stopped keeping up with you, even from afar." Walter then showed a special section of the tree where he kept hundreds of miniature toys, each with a name and a date engraved. All the gifts he would have given to his grandchildren if circumstances had been different. "This was for your 10th birthday," he said, handing over a perfectly carved wooden doll, "and this one for Michael when he turned 8. Amanda held the doll with reverent care, feeling the weight of dedication and love contained in that silent gesture. She noticed there was a specific date on each toy, always coinciding with birthdays or special occasions. "Grandpa," the word came out naturally, breaking 4 decades of separation. "Why did you never come back? Why did you never try to talk to us?" Walter took a deep breath and began to tell the true story. He spoke about the conversations he had overheard between Evelyn and the doctor, about the plan for institutionalization, about the lies that were spread after his departure. With each word, the confusing puzzle of Amanda's family history began to make sense. "Your grandmother, Evelyn, she was jealous of my work, of the dedication I put into my woodworking. She interpreted my habits as signs of madness and decided to get rid of me in the worst way possible." "But she remarried," Amanda said, processing the information. "She always said you had abandoned her." "She married Robert 5 years after I disappeared. But before that, she built a completely false narrative about who I was and why I left." Walter then showed the letters he had written to Jennifer over the years, hundreds of them, explaining the situation, apologizing for the need to leave, declaring his unconditional love, all unsent, kept as silent testimonies of a father who never stopped loving. Amanda read the letters with a broken heart. Each one revealed a sensitive, intelligent man, desperately in love with the family he had been forced to leave behind. There was no sign of mental instability, only the deep pain of a misunderstood love. "Why did you never send these letters?" "Because your grandmother had convinced your mother that I was dangerous. If I suddenly appeared, it could be interpreted as a threat, and then maybe she would actually manage to have me institutionalized." The conversation was interrupted when they heard voices approaching. It was a group of tourists who often passed by the trail. Walter quickly invited Amanda to come inside the tree and closed the door. "They pass by almost every day," he explained in a low voice. "They never suspected someone lives in here." Inside the tree, with filtered light coming through small openings Walter had strategically made, Amanda could better observe the details of the construction. Each piece of furniture was a work of art in itself, demonstrating not only technical skill, but impressive aesthetic refinement. "You did all this by yourself?" "I had 40 years to perfect every detail," Walter replied with a sad smile. "When you have a lot of time and few distractions, you can create amazing things." He then showed a collection of notebooks where he had meticulously recorded homemade medicinal recipes he'd developed to treat his arthritis and other common age-related health issues. The notes were precise, organized, demonstrating a lucid and methodically scientific mind. "These recipes work better than any pharmacy medicine," he said, showing hands that, despite his age, remained steady and skillful. "I learned from the plants in this region." Amanda realized she was facing an extraordinary man who had been unfairly slandered and exiled. The story she grew up hearing didn't match at all the reality she was discovering at that moment. "I need to tell Mom and Michael," she finally said. "Will your mother believe it?" Walter asked with a mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know. But Michael will. He always asked questions about you, never fully believed the story they told." Walter smiled for the first time since Amanda had arrived. The idea that his grandson questioned the official version filled him with pride and hope. "Michael is special," he said. "Through Dorothy, I learned he inherited my curiosity, and that he received some gifts, anonymous ones." Amanda's eyes widened. "It was you, the wooden toys that appeared out of nowhere." "I couldn't resist. He seemed so curious, so intelligent. I wanted to give him at least a little of the attention a grandfather would give." Michael was fascinated by those toys. He always said whoever made them had to be someone very special. The connection between grandfather and grandson, secretly established through the gifts, deeply moved Walter. He had been right in sensing that Michael would be more receptive to the truth. "What do you want me to do?" Amanda asked. "I don't know. 40 years have passed. Maybe it's too late for changes." "It's never too late for the truth, Grandpa." That word, Grandpa, spoken with such affection and naturalness, broke Walter's last resistance. He cried openly, letting decades of pent-up emotions flow. Amanda hugged him, feeling the physical fragility of the man who had carried such a heavy emotional burden for so long. In that embrace, she felt the entire family history being reconstructed in her mind. "I'll talk to Michael first," she decided. "He needs to know before the others. And then we'll find a way to tell everyone the truth." Walter agreed, knowing he could no longer postpone confronting the past. Amanda's discovery had changed everything. Now, for the first time in 4 decades, he had an ally within the family itself. Before leaving, Amanda asked one final question that had been bothering her since she entered the tree. "How did you pay for my college? Dorothy told me it was you." Walter smiled proudly. "I sold furniture in the neighboring town, always using another name. I saved every penny for years. Your education was more important than anything I could want for myself." "But why did you do it?" "I didn't even know you." "Because you're my granddaughter. And a grandfather always takes care of his grandchildren, even if they don't know it." Amanda left the forest with a heavy heart but determined. She had found not just a grandfather, but an extraordinary man who had been the victim of a terrible injustice. Now it was up to her to begin the process of making things right. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The journey home was an intense emotional experience for Amanda. Every familiar street seemed different. Every house carried new meanings now that she knew the truth about the family history. The lies that had supported 40 years of separation seemed crueler with each step. Michael was at home when she arrived, studying for an engineering college exam. At 22, he had inherited his grandfather's practical intelligence and his mother's sensitivity, a combination that made him especially perceptive to inconsistencies in family stories. "Where have you been?" he asked, noticing his sister's troubled expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than that," Amanda replied, trying to organize her thoughts. "Michael, I need to tell you something that will change everything you think about our family." His sister's serious tone caught Michael's full attention. He closed his books and prepared to listen. Amanda began with the chance encounter in the forest, describing every detail of the discovery. Michael listened in silence, but his eyes widened with each revelation. When she mentioned the wooden toys hidden in the tree, he jumped from his chair. "The presents," he exclaimed. "Those mysterious toys I used to get when I was a kid. It was him." "Exactly. He followed our entire lives, Michael. He has albums with pictures of us since we were babies." Michael ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the information. The story he had always questioned finally made sense, but in a completely different way than he had imagined. So our grandmother lied all these years? Not just lied. She destroyed an entire family based on a cruel lie. Michael stood up and began pacing the room, agitated. He had always felt something was wrong with the official story about his grandfather, but he never imagined the extent of the deception. "I want to meet him," he said finally. "I need to hear his story in person." "I was hoping you'd say that, but we have to be careful. Mom will react badly at first, and Grandma Evelyn, she might try to cause trouble." "She's been causing trouble for 40 years, Michael said angrily. "Now it's time to settle this once and for all." They decided that Michael would first meet Walter secretly before involving the rest of the family. The next day, Amanda led him to the clearing in the forest. The meeting between grandfather and grandson was emotional. Michael immediately recognized the familiar features in Walter's aged face, especially the expressive eyes he had inherited. Walter, in turn, saw in Michael the determined personality he himself had had in his youth. "I always knew something was wrong," were Michael's first words. "The stories about you never quite added up." "You were always a smart boy," Walter replied, his voice choked. "Dorothy told me about your questions, your curiosity." Michael explored the inside of the tree with the same fascination Amanda had shown. But as a future engineer, he especially appreciated the technical aspects of the construction. "This is brilliant, Grandpa," he said, examining the rainwater collection system. "You created a complete self-sustaining system." 40 years teach you to be creative with limited resources," Walter replied, proud of his grandson's technical recognition. Michael spent hours talking with his grandfather, absorbing decades of wisdom and stories. Walter told him about life in the forest, the challenges faced, the solutions invented. More importantly, he shared his memories about the family, the discreet observations he had made over the years. "I was there when you graduated from high school," Walter revealed. "Dorothy told me about the ceremony. I stayed hidden in the back of the auditorium, wearing sunglasses and a different hat." "You were there." Michael was moved. "I remember feeling like someone special was watching me that day. I was so proud. You walked up to the stage with so much confidence, so much determination. It was one of the happiest days of my life." The stories multiplied. Walter had discreetly witnessed several important occasions, always through simple disguises or distant observation. He knew intimate details about his grandchildren's personalities that only a close family member could know. "When you were little and broke your arm," Walter said, "I went 3 nights without sleep, worried. Dorothy brought me updates about your treatment hour by hour." Michael felt a deep connection forming. This man wasn't the absent grandfather he had imagined, but someone who had been invisibly present throughout his entire life. "Why did you never try direct contact?" he asked. "Because your grandmother Evelyn had convinced everyone I was dangerous. If I suddenly appeared, it could seem like a real threat. Besides," Walter paused, gathering courage for a difficult confession, "I was afraid of rejection. Afraid that we wouldn't believe you. Afraid that you had learned to hate me based on the lies you heard. 40 years is a long time to build resentment." Michael understood his grandfather's dilemma. The situation was too complex for simple solutions. Evelyn had created such an elaborate web of lies that any attempt at clarification could be interpreted as manipulation or mental instability. "But now we know the truth," Michael said with determination, "and we're going to do something about it." The conversation between the two lasted until late afternoon. When Michael finally prepared to leave, he and Walter had already developed a plan for gradually revealing the truth to the rest of the family. Let's start with Mom, Michael decided. She deserves to know first. Then we'll deal with Grandma Evelyn. Walter agreed, though he still had concerns about Jennifer's reaction. 40 years of accumulated hurt don't resolve easily with explanations, even if they're true. The following evening, Michael spoke with Jennifer. He chose a moment when they were alone after dinner, when the house was quiet. "Mom, I need to tell you something very important about Dad." Jennifer immediately became tense. Any mention of her missing father still caused discomfort, even after so many years. "Michael, you know I don't like talking about that." "I know, but this time it's different. This time I have answers." Michael told her about Amanda's discovery and the meeting he himself had with his grandfather. Jennifer listened in silence, but her expression went through several stages: disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally, deep pain. "This is impossible," she said when Michael finished. "Your grandfather abandoned us 40 years ago. If he were alive, he would have given signs." "He did give signs, Mum. The toys I received as a child, the anonymous help paying for Amanda's college. He was always present, just invisibly." Jennifer stood up abruptly, too agitated to remain seated. "Your grandmother explained everything to me. He was going crazy, talking to himself all the time, having strange behaviors." "Mom, he talked to himself because that was his way of working. Many craftsmen do that. There's nothing abnormal about it." "But the other things—" "What other things?" Michael pressed. "What other specific things did Grandma Evelyn tell you?" Jennifer hesitated. When she tried to remember specific details of the accusations against her father, she realized they were always vague, generic, never including concrete examples of problematic behaviors. She said he was sick. Based on what? Was he ever violent? Did he ever do anything truly strange besides talking to himself at work? Jennifer tried to remember, but couldn't find specific memories that justified Evelyn's concerns. In fact, her last memories of her father were of a caring, attentive man, completely dedicated to his family. "I don't understand," she said, her voice beginning to tremble. "If he was fine, why did he leave?" "Because Grandma Evelyn planned to commit him based on a lie. He found out and ran away to protect himself." The revelation hit Jennifer like a punch in the stomach. The possibility that her mother had lied about something so serious was almost unacceptable. But at the same time, it explained several inconsistencies she had always ignored. "I need to talk to him," she finally said, tears beginning to flow. "I need to hear his version in person." Michael smiled, knowing he had won the first battle. Convincing Jennifer had been easier than expected, perhaps because deep down, she had always felt something was wrong. "He's afraid you'll reject him," Michael said gently. 40 years is a long time. He doesn't know if you'll be able to forgive him for leaving." "He doesn't need forgiveness if he was forced to leave," Jennifer replied, her anger now directed at Evelyn. "I'm the one who needs forgiveness for believing the lies." The next day, Jennifer accompanied her children to the forest. The walk to the clearing was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Jennifer was nervous, preparing to confront 40 years of hurt and misunderstandings. When she finally saw her father standing before the giant tree, Jennifer couldn't hold back the tears. Walter had aged. He was thinner, with completely white hair, but he was unmistakably the man she remembered from childhood. "Dad?" The word came out as a whisper. Walter turned and saw his grown daughter, now a middle-aged woman but still with the same expressive eyes he had carried in his memory for 4 decades. They looked at each other for a long moment, both processing the enormity of the reunion. "Jennifer," he said simply, his voice choked. She approached slowly, as if afraid he might be a mirage that could disappear at any moment. When she finally touched him, feeling the physical reality of his presence, she broke down in sobs. "Why did you leave?" she asked through tears. "Why did you leave me?" "I never left you," Walter replied, hugging the daughter he hadn't seen since she was a young adult. "I was always here, taking care of you the only way I could." The conversation that followed was intense and painful. Walter told the whole story again, this time directly to Jennifer. He showed her the letters he had written to her over the years, the photographs he had kept, the gifts he had prepared for special occasions. Jennifer read the letters with a broken heart, seeing the unconditional love her father had always felt for her. Every line revealed a man who suffered from the separation, but who persisted in love, even from a distance. "I believed her," Jennifer said, referring to Evelyn. "I believed everything she said about you. She is your mother. It was natural for you to trust her. But the things she said, how could she make all that up?" Walter took a deep breath before answering. It was time to reveal more painful aspects of the truth. "Your mother. She was jealous of my work. She thought I spent too much time on woodworking, that I loved the wood more than her. When she started hearing me talk to myself while working, she saw an opportunity to solve her problem. Solve it by committing you to a psychiatric clinic. It was a way to get rid of me without taking responsibility for the separation. If I were declared mentally incompetent, she could remarry without guilt." The coldness of Evelyn's manipulation shocked Jennifer. She had always seen her mother as a victim of circumstances, an abandoned woman who had needed to rebuild her life. Discovering that Evelyn had been the architect of the family's destruction was almost unacceptable. "She married Robert 5 years later," Jennifer recalled. "I know. Dorothy told me. She also told me how she changed the story over the years, painting me as irresponsible, aggressive, and alcoholic." "My God!" Jennifer covered her face with her hands. "How could I have been so blind? You were young, and she was convincing. Besides, you had no way to check the information. I had completely disappeared." Jennifer spent the rest of the afternoon in the tree, absorbing decades of history that had been denied to her. Walter showed every corner of his makeshift home, explained how he had survived, shared the strategies he had developed to keep track of the family from a distance. What impressed her most were the detailed notebooks where Walter had recorded information about each family member. He knew about her work promotions, the health issues she had faced, the children's achievements. Nothing had escaped his caring attention. "You paid for Amanda's college," she said, still processing her father's silent generosity. "It was the least I could do. Education was always our family priority. But you were living with so little. I had everything I needed. You were the ones being deprived of a father and grandfather who loved you." The guilt Jennifer felt was almost unbearable. 40 years of unjust resentment. 40 years during which her father had suffered in silence while she believed lies about him. "How can you not hate me?" she asked. "Because hate is a choice, and I chose to love. Every day, for 40 years, I chose to keep loving you, even though you didn't know it." Walter's words revealed the depth of his character. He had turned a victimizing situation into a daily exercise of unconditional love. When they finally returned home, Jennifer was transformed. The anger she felt was now directed solely at Evelyn, and she was determined to confront her mother with the truth. The confrontation happened the following evening. Jennifer, accompanied by Amanda and Michael, went to the house where Evelyn lived with Robert. The stepfather, unaware of the old family dramas, received them with surprise. "We need to talk to Evelyn," Jennifer announced, her formal tone making it clear this wasn't a social visit. Evelyn, now 82 but still lucid and manipulative, sensed something had changed. Jennifer's posture was different, more assertive, more confident. "About what?" she asked, trying to maintain control of the situation. "About Dad, about the lies you told for 40 years. Evelyn's face paled, but she tried to keep up the facade. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your father abandoned us when you were young." "We found him, Grandma," Michael said, deciding to be direct. "He's alive, he's well, and he's been living in a tree in the woods since the day he discovered your plan to commit him." Evelyn tried to deny it, but the accuracy of the family's information made it impossible to maintain the lies. When Jennifer mentioned specific details about the commitment plan, Evelyn finally realized she had been found out. "He was getting strange," she said, attempting one last defense. "He talked to himself all the time, seemed to be losing his mind." "He talked to himself because he was working," Amanda replied, "and you knew that. You made up a mental illness that didn't exist." Robert, who had been listening to the conversation with growing discomfort, began to understand he had married a woman capable of cruel manipulations. He had always known there were odd aspects to the story of Evelyn's first husband, but he had never questioned it directly. "Why?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling with contained anger. "Why did you do this to us?" Evelyn tried to avoid answering, but under the pressure of the united family, her defenses finally gave way. "He loved that damn woodworking more than me," she confessed bitterly. "He spent hours and hours there talking to the wood as if it were people. I felt alone in my own marriage." "So you decided to destroy our family?" Michael asked, incredulous. "I didn't want to destroy anything. I just wanted him to give me more attention. The idea of the commitment was to scare him, to make him realize what he could lose." "But when he found out and ran away, you didn't try to clarify," Jennifer pointed out. "You took the opportunity to paint him as a bad man who abandoned us." Evelyn had no answer for that. The truth was that after Walter's departure, she had enjoyed the sympathy she received as an abandoned woman. It was easier to be seen as a victim than to admit her role in the destruction of the marriage. "And then you got married again," Amanda added. "You used his forced absence to rebuild your life, while he suffered alone in the forest." The cruelty of the situation finally became clear to everyone in the room. Evelyn had orchestrated not only the separation of the family, but also created the conditions to benefit from the situation. Robert rose from his armchair, visibly disturbed. "Evelyn, is this true?" he asked his wife. "Did you really do this?" Evelyn tried to justify her actions, but each word only confirmed the extent of her manipulation. Robert realized he had lived 25 years with a completely false version of the woman he had married. The family left Evelyn's house that night with a sense of partial justice. The truth had been revealed, the lies exposed, but 40 years of separation could not simply be erased with a conversation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the days following the confrontation with Evelyn, the family faced the challenge of rebuilding relationships that had been interrupted for 4 decades. Walter agreed to leave the tree temporarily to stay at Jennifer's house, but the transition wasn't easy for anyone involved. The house that Jennifer maintained was too small to comfortably accommodate an additional person, especially someone with specific needs like Walter. At 75, he had developed habits and routines adapted to life in the forest that didn't fit easily into modern urban life. In the first few nights, Walter could barely sleep. The constant traffic noise, artificial lights, neighborhood sounds, everything conspired against the rest of someone used to the absolute silence of the woods. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, missing the tranquility of his tree. Jennifer noticed her father's discomfort and felt guilty for not being able to provide a more suitable environment. The house had been bought with a small nuclear family in mind, never imagining that one day it would need to accommodate the father everyone thought was lost forever. "You don't have to stay here if you're not comfortable," she said one morning, after noticing that Walter had spent another sleepless night. "It's not a matter of comfort," he replied. "It's a matter of adaptation. 40 years building a routine, and now I need to learn everything all over again." Michael suggested they look for a larger house where Walter could have his own space, but that would involve costs the family wasn't prepared to take on. Jennifer worked as a teacher with a modest salary, and the children were at the beginning of their professional careers. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dorothy, the elderly neighbor who had been the bridge between Walter and the family all those years, offered her own home. She lived alone in a house too large for her needs, a legacy from a time when the family was numerous. "That house used to be full of life," she told Jennifer. "It would be nice to have company again." The proposal made practical and emotional sense. Dorothy knew Walter's habits and needs better than anyone. Moreover, she had been his only confidant for decades, creating a deep friendship based on mutual trust. Walter accepted the offer, but insisted on contributing to household expenses and helping with necessary repairs. His carpentry skills, preserved and refined during his years in the forest, proved invaluable for modernizing the old residence. The living arrangement between Walter and Dorothy worked better than anyone had imagined. They developed a comfortable routine, respecting each other's spaces and needs. Dorothy finally had someone to share household responsibilities with, while Walter found an environment that balanced human companionship with the tranquility he needed. For the family, having Walter live with Dorothy provided the necessary proximity to rebuild relationships without the pressure of daily cohabitation. Jennifer and the children could visit him regularly, but he maintained his independence and privacy. The visits became a precious ritual. Every weekend, the family gathered at Dorothy's house for long lunches that stretched into the late afternoon. Walter cooked dishes he had learned to make during his solitary years, using herbs and spices he grew in small gardens. Michael was fascinated by his grandfather's practical skills. Walter had developed ingenious solutions to everyday problems, using only basic resources and creativity. For an engineering student, those practical lessons were more valuable than any academic theory. "How did you learn to do that?" Michael asked, watching Walter fix an old clock that Dorothy had thought was beyond repair. "Necessity and time," Walter replied, delicately adjusting a small gear. "When you can't buy solutions, you have to invent them." Amanda, in turn, became interested in the natural medicine knowledge her grandfather had developed. As an educator, she saw educational value in that traditional wisdom and began documenting it systematically. "You could teach this to other people," she suggested. "There's a lot of interest these days in alternative medicine and sustainable living." The idea planted a seed in Walter's mind. After decades of isolation, perhaps it was time to share what he had learned with a broader community. Jennifer initially had difficulty relating to her father. 40 years of separation had created an emotional barrier that didn't dissolve easily. She felt as if she were getting to know a stranger who shared her physical features and family history. "It's strange," she confessed to Amanda. "I know he's my father. I remember my childhood with him, but it's as if he's a completely different person." "He is different," Amanda replied wisely. 40 years of solitary life changed him, but the love he feels for you never changed. Gradually, through long and honest conversations, Jennifer began to rediscover the father she had lost. Walter shared not only the events of the years of separation, but also his feelings, fears, hopes, and dreams. He revealed himself to be a deep, philosophical man who had used isolation to develop a rare understanding of life and human relationships. "You've become wise," Jennifer said one afternoon, after a particularly revealing conversation about forgiveness and resilience. "I've become observant," Walter corrected. "When you have plenty of time to think and few people to judge, you learn to see things differently." His words carried a serenity that impressed the whole family. Walter showed no bitterness for the injustice he had suffered, nor anger over the lost opportunities. Instead, he seemed to have found an inner peace that many people spend their entire lives searching for. The family story, however, still had chapters left to write. Evelyn, confronted with her lies and seemingly rejected even by Robert, who had discovered the extent of her manipulations, began taking desperate measures to regain control of the situation. She spread through the neighborhood that Walter had returned, but now with real mental issues stemming from years of isolation. According to her version, he was living in a fantasy, inventing stories to justify abandoning the family decades ago. The gossip reached Jennifer through co-workers who had heard comments around town. Evelyn's strategy was clear. If she could no longer maintain the old lies, she would create new ones to discredit Walter. "She'll never stop," Jennifer said, outraged, after hearing the latest rumors. "Even now, even after being exposed, she keeps trying to harm you." Walter received the news with the calmness he had cultivated over the years. "Let her talk," he said. "The truth always becomes evident with time. People who know me now will form their own opinions." And he was right. As Walter slowly reintegrated into the community, participating in local events and helping neighbors with his carpentry skills, his reputation established itself naturally. People saw a kind, skilled man, completely lucid and socially adjusted. The definitive turn in public perception came when Walter agreed to help with the renovation of the local church. The priest, a young and open-minded man, had heard both Evelyn's versions and Jennifer's family's accounts. He decided to form his own opinion by offering Walter a carpentry project for the church. The work Walter did was extraordinary. He restored old pews with a precision and care that demonstrated not just technical skill, but also love for the craft and respect for the sacred space. The result impressed the entire congregation. "This man has special gifts," the priest commented during a mass, indirectly referring to Walter's qualities. When someone dedicates such care to their work, they are honoring God through their talents. The priest's words carried weight in the religious community, effectively neutralizing Evelyn's attempts to slander Walter. People began seeking him out for small carpentry jobs, curious to get to know better the man who had created such beautiful work in the church. Walter accepted some projects, always charging fair but modest prices. He wasn't interested in profit, but in the satisfaction of using his skills to help others. Each completed job strengthened his reputation and dismantled Evelyn's last attempts to harm him. Michael accompanied his grandfather on many of these projects, learning traditional carpentry techniques that weren't taught in any engineering college. The collaboration between them became special, combining Walter's traditional knowledge with Michael's modern technical education. "You could teach this professionally," Michael suggested, watching his grandfather work with a precision that bordered on art. "Perhaps," Walter replied, considering the idea. "It would be a way to leave a legacy of the years I spent perfecting these techniques." The idea of teaching appealed to Walter, but in a different way than Michael imagined. Instead of formal classes, he preferred the traditional method of passing on knowledge, working alongside interested people, letting them learn through observation and practice. Dorothy watched this entire transformation with pride and joy. She had been a silent witness to 40 years of suffering and now saw Walter's life finally taking a positive turn. The house she had offered had become a center of activity and learning. "You deserve this happiness," she told Walter on a quiet afternoon, as they watched Michael working on a table they were building together. "We deserve it," Walter corrected. "You were alone for many years too. Now we have a chosen family that means as much as any blood family." Walter's observation revealed how his perspective on family had evolved. The years of isolation taught him to value connections based on choice and affinity, not just biological obligations. Evelyn, seeing her last efforts to slander Walter fail, made a drastic decision. She showed up at Dorothy's house one afternoon unannounced, claiming she wanted to settle things with Walter. Dorothy was in town buying groceries, leaving Walter alone at home. When Evelyn knocked on the door, he hesitated before opening, knowing the encounter would be difficult. "Walter," she said when the door opened, attempting a conciliatory tone that convinced no one. "Evelyn," he replied, keeping the door only partially open. "Can we talk? I think we had misunderstandings in the past." Walter knew there were no misunderstandings, only deliberate lies, but decided to hear what she had to say. He invited her in but left the front door open, a symbolic precaution. "I wanted to apologize," Evelyn began, but her body language contradicted her words. "Maybe I was wrong about some things in the past." "Some things?" Walter repeated, keeping a neutral tone. Evelyn tried to minimize her actions, portraying them as misunderstandings stemming from genuine concern. She suggested they could forget the past and move forward as a normal family. Walter listened patiently but immediately recognized the manipulation. Evelyn wasn't genuinely apologizing. She was trying to regain control over a situation that had completely slipped from her grasp. "Evelyn," he said when she finished her performance, "I forgive you for what you did. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending nothing happened. But we could try. You destroyed 40 years of my life and our family's life based on a lie. Now that the truth has been revealed, you want me to pretend it was just a misunderstanding?" Evelyn's mask began to slip. She realized Walter wouldn't be manipulated like Jennifer had been decades earlier. "You were always stubborn," she said, irritation beginning to show in her voice. "Always thinking you were right about everything." "And you were always manipulative," Walter replied calmly. "The difference is that now I recognize it, and our family recognizes it too." Evelyn tried a few additional tactics, including tears and claims that she was being unfairly persecuted. Walter remained firm but gentle, making clear that although he forgave her, he had no interest in re-establishing any kind of relationship. "You can visit the grandchildren when they want to see you," he said. "But with me, we ended 40 years ago, when you decided to destroy me instead of talking about our marital problems." Evelyn left the house defeated, finally understanding she had permanently lost any influence over the family she had manipulated for so long. Robert, who had discovered the extent of her lies, had already begun separation proceedings. She found herself alone, the consequence of decades of manipulation and dishonesty. For Walter, the encounter represented a necessary closure. He had directly confronted the source of so much suffering and discovered that Evelyn no longer had power over him. 40 years of isolation and reflection had made him immune to the manipulations that once nearly destroyed his life. The family received news of the encounter with relief. Jennifer, in particular, felt proud of how her father had handled the situation. "You've become much stronger," she observed. "I've become much clearer about who I am and what I accept in my life," Walter replied. "Evelyn can continue being whoever she chooses to be, but she won't affect our family anymore." The resolution with Evelyn marked the beginning of a new phase for everyone. The family could finally focus on building positive relationships without the constant shadow of past manipulations. Michael graduated with an engineering degree that year, with Walter present at the ceremony. Seeing his grandfather in the auditorium, proudly applauding, was a full-circle moment for the young man who had grown up questioning the family's official history. Amanda decided to leave her teaching job to start a project documenting the traditional knowledge Walter had developed. She saw value not only in the practical techniques, but also in the sustainable living philosophy he had cultivated. "You could help many people who are seeking a simpler life connected with nature," she told her grandfather, "but without abandoning their families," Walter replied with a smile. "What I did was necessary in my situation, but it's not a model I'd recommend for others." Walter's wisdom always included this important distinction. He didn't romanticize his isolation or encourage others to follow the same path. His experience was unique, the result of specific circumstances, not a general life model. Jennifer gradually rebuilt her relationship with her father to the point where they could talk about anything naturally. The dynamic wasn't identical to what existed 40 years earlier. They had changed too much for that. But it was deep and genuine in a new way. "I lost many years being angry with you for something you didn't do," she said in an intimate conversation. "And I lost many years being afraid you would reject me if you knew the truth," Walter replied. "We both lost precious time because of someone else's lies." "But we won't lose any more time," Jennifer declared. "We have years ahead to recover what was lost." Jennifer's promise became a personal mission. She began visiting her father almost daily, sometimes just to talk, other times to help with projects or simply spend time together without any specific agenda. Dorothy watched these developments with deep satisfaction. She had been the secret keeper of the family's hope for 4 decades and now saw her efforts finally bearing fruit in genuine, healed relationships. "It was worth the wait," she commented to Walter, watching Jennifer and the children working together in the garden they had planted in the backyard. "You always believed this would be possible," Walter responded. "I had days when I lost hope." "Hope is like a plant," Dorothy philosophized. "Sometimes it seems dead, but the roots remain alive beneath the soil, waiting for the right conditions to bloom again." Dorothy's metaphor perfectly captured the family's journey. Decades of separation had not killed the love. They had only forced it to survive in different forms, waiting for the opportunity to emerge again. Walter's first Christmas with his family in 40 years was a special event that everyone prepared with extraordinary care. Jennifer decided the celebration would be at Dorothy's house, in the environment where Walter felt most comfortable. Amanda and Michael took charge of the decorations, creating a festive but not showy atmosphere, respecting the simpler taste their grandfather had developed. Dorothy supervised the menu, ensuring it included dishes that Walter enjoyed. Jennifer spent weeks preparing special gifts. Instead of store-bought items, she created a photo album documenting the months since their reunion, capturing precious moments of family rebuilding. Michael built, with Walter's help, a wooden table especially for the occasion. It was a joint project, symbolizing collaboration between generations and the restoration of family traditions. Amanda wrote and illustrated a book telling the true family story, intended for future generations who deserve to know the truth about their patriarch. The book included photographs of the treehouse and explanations of how Walter had survived and thrived during his exile. On the day of the celebration, Walter was moved to see the care everyone had dedicated to the event. It was the first time in decades he felt truly part of a family celebration. "This is the best Christmas of my life," he said, looking around the table where his family was gathered. "It's only the first of many," Jennifer replied, raising a toast, "to the years we lost and the years we still have ahead." The toast marked not just a celebration, but a collective promise that the family had learned from past mistakes and was committed to building a future based on truth and genuine love. Walter's story quickly became known in town, not through malicious gossip, but through the positive example he represented. People who had gone through difficult family separations sought to talk with him, looking for guidance on forgiveness and reconciliation. Walter never presented himself as a counselor or expert, but generously shared his experience with those who showed genuine interest. He always emphasized that every situation was unique and that there were no magic formulas for resolving complex family conflicts. The only universal thing, he would say, is that true love withstands time and circumstances, but needs truth to flourish again. His words, simple but profound, touched people who had lost hope of reconciling with estranged relatives. Walter inadvertently became a symbol that it was never too late to right wrongs and rebuild relationships. The transformation in Walter's life was complete, but he never forgot the lessons learned during the years of solitude. He maintained a routine of daily contemplation, preserving the inner peace he had cultivated in the forest. "Solitude taught me to value companionship," he explained to Jennifer, "but it also taught me that I can be happy with myself, which makes my happiness with others more genuine." Walter's philosophy about relationships had become more mature and less dependent. He loved his family deeply, but didn't need them to feel complete. This emotional independence, paradoxically, made him an even better father and grandfather. Dorothy, now 85 years old, began showing signs of physical frailty. Walter naturally took on more responsibilities around the house, caring for the friend who had been his salvation for so many years. "Now it's my turn to take care of you," he said, helping her with tasks that were becoming increasingly difficult for her. The role reversal was natural and affectionate. Dorothy had emotionally cared for Walter during his most difficult phase. Now he reciprocated by physically caring for her in her most fragile stage. Jennifer and the children also became involved in Dorothy's care, recognizing she was an integral part of the extended family. The house became a hub of intergenerational activity, where wisdom was shared in all directions. Michael got married during this period and insisted that Walter be the one to walk him down the aisle. The ceremony was a deeply symbolic moment, representing family traditions that had been preserved despite decades of separation. "My grandfather is here with me on the most important day of my life," Michael said in his reception speech. "Some people might think he arrived late, but I believe he arrived exactly when he was supposed to." Michael's words captured the entire family's sentiment. Walter hadn't lost 40 years. He had invested 40 years in a journey that prepared him to be exactly the father, grandfather, and man his family needed now. Amanda also married shortly after Michael. She asked Walter to build something special for the ceremony, and he created an intricately carved wooden arch that became the visual centerpiece of the celebration. "Every detail on this arch represents a member of our family," she explained to the guests. "My grandfather spent months working on it, putting love into every line." The arch would become a family heirloom, used in future celebrations and symbolizing the reunification Walter had made possible through his quiet persistence. Walter's attention then turned to a final project he had contemplated for years in the forest, writing his memoirs, not as an exercise in self-pity, but as a testament to resilience, unconditional love, and the human capacity to transform trauma into wisdom. Amanda helped organize and edit the manuscript, which included philosophical reflections on isolation, family, forgiveness, and aging. The book wasn't just an autobiography, but a collection of insights about sustainable living, both ecologically and emotionally. "Your experiences could help many people," Amanda said while reading the early chapters. "Not just people in difficult family situations, but anyone seeking a more authentic and connected life. The book project gave Walter a renewed sense of purpose. He had transformed his personal experience of suffering into a potential source of help and inspiration for others. Jennifer contributed to the book by sharing her perspective on the reunion and forgiveness process. Her section explored how prejudices and misunderstandings can distort family relationships, and how the courage to question established narratives can lead to healing. Michael added a technical section about the sustainable innovations Walter had developed in the forest, presenting them as practical models for modern ecological living. The book, when finally published by a small local press, found a receptive audience of people interested in true stories of overcoming and reconciliation. Walter donated all profits to programs assisting families in crisis, maintaining his commitment to using his experience to help others. The book's publication brought some regional media attention to Walter's story. He accepted a few interviews, always emphasizing that his story wasn't about individual heroism, but about the power of persistent love and eventual truth. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he told interviewers. "I just refused to give up on loving my family, even when it seemed pointless." His modesty and wisdom impressed people who came to know him through these interviews. Walter had found the perfect balance between sharing his experience and avoiding self-promotion. Evelyn, now living alone after her separation from Robert, occasionally appeared at public events where she knew Walter would be present. She never attempted to speak directly, but her presence seemed like an attempt to reassert some relevance in the family narrative. Walter treated her with distant cordiality when their paths crossed, showing he had truly moved past any bitterness. His serene indifference was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. "She's still trying to find a role in the story," Jennifer observed after one such encounter. "Let her try," Walter replied. "The real story has already been written, and she can choose which version to believe." Walter's attitude toward Evelyn demonstrated his complete emotional evolution. He had transitioned from victim to survivor, to finally thriving as someone completely free from the power she once held over his life. As Walter entered his 80s, his physical energy diminished, but his influence within the family and community continued to grow. He became the patriarch the family never knew they needed, offering guidance based on lived experience and wisdom earned through adversity. Walter's grandchildren, Michael and Amanda's children, grew up knowing their grandfather as a constant, loving presence. To them, he wasn't the man who had disappeared for 40 years, but simply the grandfather who had always been there, telling stories, teaching practical skills, and offering unconditional love. "Grandpa," one of his granddaughters asked one afternoon, "why did you live in the tree for so long?" "Because sometimes we need to step away to protect what we love," he answered simply. "And sometimes when we return, we find love has grown even stronger." The child accepted the explanation naturally, without questioning the complexities adults still struggled to understand. To her, her grandfather's story was simply part of family mythology, interesting but not traumatic. Dorothy passed away peacefully at 88, with Walter holding her hand. She had been his most constant companion during the years of exile, and his first true friend during reintegration. Her passing was a profound loss, but also a natural transition. "She saw our family reunited," Jennifer said at the funeral. She knew her mission was complete. Walter inherited Dorothy's house, which she had left to him in her will, acknowledging he had become the son she never had. The house officially became the center of family gatherings, a space where old and new traditions blended naturally. In the house, Walter set up a workshop where he taught woodworking to anyone showing genuine interest. Young people from the community came to learn not just techniques, but also work and life philosophy. He never charged for lessons, considering them a way to give back to the community that had welcomed him. "A man who keeps knowledge to himself wastes a lifetime of learning," he would say. "Knowledge only has value when shared." The workshop became an intergenerational meeting place where teenagers learned practical skills while elders shared stories and life wisdom. Walter had inadvertently created a space for community healing. Jennifer retired from formal education but remained involved in informal educational projects. She often helped in her father's workshop, discovering she had a natural talent for teaching practical skills. "You've always been an educator," Walter observed, watching her patiently work with a young woman struggling to master a basic woodworking technique. "I learned from the best," Jennifer replied, smiling at her father. The dynamic between them had evolved into a natural partnership, based on mutual respect and shared purpose. They had not only recovered their lost relationship, but created something new and even stronger. Michael established himself as a civil engineer, specializing in sustainable construction. The techniques he'd learned from his grandfather proved valuable in his professional career, offering creative solutions to modern challenges. "Half of my projects incorporate something I learned in Grandpa's workshop," he shared in a professional presentation. "Traditional technology often offers the best solutions to contemporary problems." The combination of formal education and traditional knowledge made Michael a unique professional in his field, respected by both clients and colleagues. Amanda transformed her documentation of Walter's knowledge into a research center on sustainable living. The work attracted academic interest, but she always maintained a practical focus, ensuring the information remained accessible to ordinary people interested in simpler lifestyles. "My grandfather proved it's possible to live well with very little," she wrote in her publications. "But more importantly, he proved that physical isolation doesn't have to mean emotional isolation." Amanda's work honored both Walter's practical experience and his emotional journey of keeping love alive through decades of separation. Walter, at 85, remained relatively healthy and active. The medicinal recipes he'd developed in the forest, combined with a lifetime of physical work and moderation, had preserved his vitality better than many men his age. He still regularly walked to the tree where he had lived, not out of nostalgia, but as a way to maintain connection with an important phase of his life. The tree had become a place of personal pilgrimage, where he reflected on his journey and renewed his gratitude for his regained family. "Do you still miss that life?" Jennifer asked, accompanying him on one of these walks. "I feel gratitude for that life," Walter answered. "It taught me things I would never have learned otherwise, but I don't miss the loneliness." The distinction was important. Walter had valued his experience in the forest without romanticizing it or wishing to repeat it. He had integrated the lessons learned into a fuller, more connected life. The tree where Walter had lived became a local point of interest, though he never encouraged excessive tourism. Occasionally, people who had read his book or heard his story asked to visit the place. He usually agreed, seeing these visits as teaching opportunities. "This tree saved me," he told visitors, "but what matters isn't the tree. What matters is that no matter how alone you feel, there's always a way to keep alive what matters most to you." The visits often resulted in deep conversations about resilience, family, and finding purpose in difficult circumstances. Walter discovered he had a natural talent for listening to others' problems and offering helpful perspectives without giving prescriptive advice. The Thompson family story became a positive local legend, cited as an example that family conflicts, even the most serious ones, can be resolved with patience, truth, and persistent love. Family therapists in the region occasionally referred to the case as demonstrating that reconciliation is always possible when there's genuine willingness from all involved parties. Walter never presented himself as an expert in family relationships, but his lived experience offered insights that academic theory couldn't capture. He had navigated 40 years of separation while keeping love alive, an achievement that impressed professionals working with families in crisis. "There's no manual for what you've been through," a therapist commented after interviewing the family for a case study. "You created your own path back to each other." The professional recognition validated what the family already knew. They had achieved something extraordinary through persistence, courage, and commitment to the truth. Evelyn, now in her later years and living in a nursing home, occasionally received visits from Jennifer and the grandchildren. The visits were cordial but limited, acknowledging that Evelyn still hadn't demonstrated genuine remorse for the lies she had constructed. "She's my mother," Jennifer explained to Walter. "I can't abandon her completely, even after everything she did." "You're doing the right thing," Walter agreed. "Taking care of her doesn't mean accepting her actions. It means you've chosen to be a better person than she was." Jennifer's approach toward Evelyn demonstrated how the family had learned to separate family responsibility from validation of destructive behaviors. They could care for Evelyn as an elderly person in need without forgiving or forgetting her past manipulations. Walter never visited Evelyn during her final years, a decision everyone in the family respected. He had forgiven, but forgiveness didn't require continued exposure to someone who had never demonstrated genuine change. Forgiveness is for the forgiver, he explained when asked about his decision. I freed myself from resentment, but that doesn't mean I need to expose myself again to the source of the original problem. His distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation offered a mature perspective on toxic relationships, helping others struggling with similar family situations. When Evelyn passed away, Walter attended the funeral not for her, but to support Jennifer during a difficult time. His presence demonstrated how he had become the emotional pillar of the family, offering stability even in emotionally complex situations. "Thank you for being here," Jennifer said after the ceremony. "I'm here for you, not for her," Walter responded honestly. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone." The clear distinction in his motivations showed how Walter had maintained healthy boundaries while offering unconditional support to the family members he loved. With Evelyn gone, the family could finally completely close the chapter of lies and manipulations that had defined so many years of their lives. There was no longer any shadow of the past casting doubts over the present or future. "Now we can just be a normal family," Michael observed after the funeral. "We've always been a normal family," Walter corrected gently. "We just had to find our way back to each other in an unconventional way." Walter's perspective recontextualized the entire experience. They weren't a family that had been broken and repaired. They were a family that had been temporarily separated by external forces, but had persisted through love until reunion was possible. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of love, perseverance, and family reconciliation. Do you believe Walter made the right decisions in isolating himself to protect his family? And Jennifer, did she manage to find true forgiveness after so many years of hurt? We really want to know your opinion in the comments. If this story touched your heart like it touched ours, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one.